the tragic story of Frank Sinatra's Twin Palms estate. In the late 1940s, when Palm Springs was still more desert than destination, a young architect named E. Stewart Williams received an unexpected visitor. Frank Sinatra, already a star, already a presence that filled every room he entered, walked into Williams's father's architectural office with a simple request. He wanted a grand Georgian mansion, complete with columns, balconies, and the kind of East Coast elegance that had nothing to do with the wide-open California desert. He needed it fast, he needed it private, and he needed it now. But Williams, only 26 at the time, saw something Sinatra himself didn't yet recognize. The desert demanded simplicity, clean lines, and a new way of thinking about luxury. So instead of giving him a traditional mansion, Williams returned the next day with a radically different vision, a low-slung modernist structure of glass, steel, and shadow, shaped like a perfect piano, a house that didn't fight the desert but floated above it, a house where light could move the way music does. Sinatra stared at the drawings for a long time, then he nodded. "This is it," he said. Construction moved quickly. Sinatra pushed for speed because something inside him was shifting. The fame, the pressure, the failures he tried not to acknowledge. He wanted a retreat, a place to start over, a stage where he could reshape the next act of his life. When the estate was completed in 1947, it was unlike anything Palm Springs had ever seen. An elegant, modernist jewel with sharp angles, pale stucco walls, and two towering palm trees standing side by side like silent guardians. They would give the property its name, Twin Palms. At first, it symbolized triumph, a house built at the height of his popularity, a house filled with optimism, a house where Sinatra believed he would find clarity, creativity, and calm. But even in those early days, there was a quiet tension beneath the surface, a feeling that this home, so new and full of promise, would soon witness the unraveling of everything he was fighting to hold together. By the time Sinatra settled into Twin Palms, Palm Springs was becoming the unofficial playground of Hollywood's brightest stars. Yet for Frank, the decision to root himself here had very little to do with glamour and everything to do with escape. His career, once unstoppable, was trembling under the weight of changing tastes and personal turmoil. The big band era was dying, his voice had suffered after a brutal hemorrhage, and studios that once begged for his attention were now whispering words like, "washed up." The press circled him relentlessly, sensing blood in the water. Sinatra needed somewhere quiet, somewhere distant from the noise and the questions and the doubts he couldn't silence. Palm Springs offered that. It was far enough from Los Angeles to feel like another world, yet close enough that he could return to the spotlight at a moment's notice. And tucked into the desert landscape, protected by mountains that caught the wind like cupped hands, Twin Palms became an oasis, a place where he believed he could rebuild himself. There was another reason, too. Ava Gardner. Their relationship, intense and magnetic from the start, needed privacy. The kind only the desert could provide. With Ava, Sinatra felt alive again, electrified by her independence, her beauty, her fire. But their romance was dangerous. He was still legally married. She was wary of becoming the woman blamed for breaking America's most famous marriage. They were drawn together, pulled by something reckless and undeniable, and Twin Palms seemed like a safe harbor where they could exist away from the headlines. The mansion's design fed into this fantasy. Its clean, modern lines, its walls of glass, its open sightlines. It created the illusion of honesty, transparency, simplicity, a life stripped down to essentials. No labels, no agents, no reporters, just two people and the quiet desert around them. But the truth was more complicated, because while Sinatra chose this house for refuge, for reinvention, and for love, the very structure that promised peace would soon magnify every crack forming beneath the surface. The glass walls he adored would one day reflect arguments, tears, stormy nights, and the echo of a marriage collapsing behind them. Twin Palms may have begun as an architectural experiment, but the moment Sinatra moved in, it transformed into something far more personal. A living extension of his identity, his moods, and his cravings for both control and comfort. The house was modern, daring, and unapologetically sleek, but Sinatra was not a man who simply inhabited spaces. He reshaped them. He bent them to his rhythm. The first changes were subtle. A new sound system wired through every room so music could spill from wall to wall. Custom lighting to shift the atmosphere from bright desert mornings to smoky nightclub evenings. A recording setup tucked discreetly into a corner so inspiration or loneliness could be captured on tape at any hour. Then came the pool. Shaped like a perfect piano, its black and white tiled edges glimmering under the desert sun, it became the crown jewel of the property. At night, it reflected the sky so clearly that Sinatra sometimes joked it looked like a piano floating in heaven. He loved to entertain there. Friends, musicians, actors, studio executives, the circle of people who made him feel, at least temporarily, like the old Frank again. Champagne bottles chilled on ice. Music pulsed. Guests lounged on deck chairs while Sinatra drifted from group to group, trying to outrun the restlessness that chased him. As Sinatra's relationship with Ava Gardner intensified, the house evolved again. He expanded the patio for late-night dinners, added privacy measures to keep photographers out, and filled the interior with gifts he bought for her. Perfume, jewelry, handwritten notes tucked into drawers. He wanted the estate to feel like their sanctuary, as if shaping the space could somehow shape the future of their relationship. But every addition to the property carried a shadow. The more Sinatra tried to perfect the house, the further his personal life slipped from his grasp. The estate became a paradox, a meticulously crafted refuge built on increasingly unstable emotional ground. What he didn't realize was that Twin Palms was slowly becoming a stage, and every wall he remodeled, every room he refined, would soon bear witness to the most turbulent chapter of his life. In the earliest days, life inside Twin Palms had a rhythm, a tempo that felt almost musical. Frank Sinatra woke with the sunrise spilling through floor-to-ceiling glass, the desert casting long shadows across the flagstone floors. Mornings were quiet. He liked to walk through the house barefoot, coffee in hand, humming unfinished melodies while the desert breeze drifted through the open sliding doors. But as the hours shifted, so did the tone. Music was constant in the house. Records spun endlessly. Tommy Dorsey, Billie Holiday, classical arrangements he admired, rough demos he critiqued with a scowl. He listened loud enough that the neighbors half a mile away sometimes complained. He needed the noise. Silence felt dangerous. Friends visited often. Musicians, actors, producers, people who floated in and out like cast members in an ever-changing play. There were laughter-filled afternoons by the piano-shaped pool, cocktails at noon, ashtrays filling with cigarette butts as conversations stretched into the early hours. On good days, Sinatra was magnetic, telling stories, improvising songs, tossing jokes like a headliner performing for his favorite crowd. But the house also saw the other Frank, the Frank who paced when anxiety tightened its grip, the Frank who retreated to the bedroom with a bottle when a phone call brought bad news from a studio executive, the Frank who felt his career slipping through his fingers like dry sand. When Ava Gardner entered his life more fully, the daily rhythm changed again. Their passion was undeniable, explosive, intoxicating, and the walls of Twin Palms absorbed every moment. There were nights when they danced in the living room, their reflections glimmering in the glass, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. And there were nights when the arguments shook the house, voices rising, doors slamming, a cigarette crushed out with trembling hands. Neighbors claimed they once heard Sinatra throwing a champagne bottle across the patio after a particularly vicious fight. Friends recalled arriving the next morning to find him alone by the pool, sleeves rolled up, staring at the water like it held answers he couldn't reach. Because inside Twin Palms, daily life was never just routine. It was a pendulum, swinging between celebration and despair, love and heartbreak, hope and the fear that both his career and his marriage were unraveling faster than he could stop them. By the early 1950s, the desert sun over Twin Palms cast longer, heavier shadows. What had once been a glamorous retreat was turning into a pressure chamber, a place where every insecurity, every fear, every professional blow echoed louder than anywhere else. Sinatra's career was collapsing in real time. His vocal hemorrhage had weakened the voice that once defined him. Radio stations played younger, fresher singers. Film studios backed away. Contracts dried up. Former allies whispered that maybe he'd had his moment. And it was gone. Inside Twin Palms, those whispers became thunder. He stayed up later and later, drinking through the silent hours, replaying old recordings as if trying to remind himself who he used to be. Friends would arrive at midnight, only to find him staring into space, a cigarette burning down between his fingers, a half-finished glass sweating on the table beside him. And then there was Ava. Their love was deep, undeniable, and often unbearable. They were too similar, fiery, jealous, passionate to the point of self-destruction. When they were good, they could fill the house with music and laughter for days. When they were bad, the walls seemed to tremble with the force of their arguments. Rumors spread among their friends, a lamp smashed against a wall, a phone ripped from the cradle, Ava fleeing the house in tears while Sinatra shouted after her. Some stories were exaggerated, others were not. The truth lived somewhere between legend and lived experience, but one thing was clear. The relationship was cracking. Sinatra felt her slipping away, and that fear poured out in unpredictable ways. One night during a heated argument, he reportedly fired a gun into the air outside the house, a desperate gesture fueled by alcohol and heartbreak. The bullet hole stayed in the ceiling for years. Meanwhile, financial stress tightened around him. The lavish parties, the gifts for Ava, the upkeep of the estate, it all strained a shrinking income. Twin Palms, once a symbol of success, was becoming an expensive reminder of everything unraveling. Every corner of the home carried a memory, a fight, a confession, a silence. Sinatra felt haunted by his own life. The house that was meant to save him now held every ghost he tried to outrun. By 1953, the once vibrant energy of Twin Palms had dimmed into something heavier, quieter, and irrevocably sad. Sinatra moved through the house like a ghost of his former self, passing the same rooms where he once laughed with friends, where he kissed Ava, against the glass walls at midnight, where music had poured out of him effortlessly. Now the silence inside the estate felt absolute. His marriage to Ava Gardner was crumbling. She was gone more often than she was home, filming overseas, traveling with friends, trying to escape the intensity that had defined their life together. When she did return, it was usually brief, tense, and punctuated by arguments that exhausted them both. The house that once protected their passion now only amplified their distance. Sinatra knew the end was coming. He felt it before she ever said a word. Ava was slipping away, chasing a life that didn't include the emotional storms of Twin Palms. And as her absence grew, Sinatra's connection to the house began to dissolve. Every glance at the pool, the patio, the shadowed hallway reminded him of something he'd lost or something he'd broken. Professionally, things were not much brighter. He fought desperately for a role in From Here to Eternity, believing it could resurrect his career. The battle consumed him, and the waiting nearly crushed him. During those months, friends recalled him wandering the house at night, muttering lines from the script, rehearsing scenes to no one, holding on to hope with trembling hands. When Ava finally told him she wanted space, real space, Sinatra shattered. He slammed doors, tore through drawers, cursed the walls that had witnessed their love fall apart. One evening, neighbors heard the piano-shaped pool reverberate with the splash of Sinatra diving in fully clothed, as if trying to drown the grief pulsing through him. The decision to leave Twin Palms was not sudden. It was a slow surrender. Sinatra realized he could no longer stay in a place that kept every wound open. The mansion had become a museum of memories he wasn't strong enough to face. And so, with Ava gone and his life in ruins, he locked the door one final time. Twin Palms, the house he thought would save him, watched him walk away, smaller, quieter, and heartbreakingly alone. When Sinatra stepped away from Twin Palms, he didn't just leave behind a house, he left behind a version of himself. The man who had once arrived in Palm Springs with swagger, ambition, and the world at his feet was gone. In his place was someone humbled, bruised, and desperate to rebuild what had been shattered. The estate sat quiet for a long time after his departure. The piano-shaped pool, once the center of spirited gatherings, now reflected still, empty nights. The walls that had absorbed laughter, arguments, music, and heartbreak now held only silence. Friends who passed through Palm Springs said the house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the echo of a life that had burned too brightly and too fast. Sinatra, meanwhile, drifted. He bounced between hotels, studio apartments, borrowed houses. His finances were in shambles. His marriage to Ava was collapsing in public view. And his career, at least for a moment, felt completely over. The phone didn't ring. The offers didn't come. Reporters wrote obituaries for his relevance. Yet it was in this lowest moment that something surprising happened. The very pain he carried from Twin Palms sharpened him. He fought harder for the role in From Here to Eternity, pouring every ounce of desperation into that performance. His friends later said they had never seen him so focused, so raw, so aware of how little he had left to lose. The emotional wreckage of Twin Palms became fuel for a comeback that would eventually become one of the most legendary in Hollywood history. But the house did not share in that triumph. It changed owners quietly, slipping from hand to hand without fanfare. Some saw it as a stylish modernist gem. Others sensed the melancholy woven into its beams. Over time, the story of Sinatra's life there became a whisper, then a rumor, then a myth passed down among Palm Springs locals. The truth was simpler. Twin Palms had been the backdrop of the darkest chapter in Sinatra's life, and the weight of those memories lingered long after he left. The house stood in the desert, waiting for the day when someone would ask what had really happened behind those glass walls, and why Sinatra never returned. In the decades that followed Sinatra's departure, Twin Palms became something unusual, a place where architecture, celebrity, and emotional history collided in a way few houses ever experience. It stood quietly at the edge of the desert, its clean lines untouched, its piano-shaped pool shimmering beneath the same sun that once warmed Sinatra's shoulders. But for a long time, the house was more memory than monument. Architectural historians praised E. Stewart Williams's design, calling it a breakthrough in desert modernism. Students sketched its angles, scholars dissected its structure. But locals remembered something else. The stories whispered over drinks, the arguments that spilled into the patio, the night Sinatra paced through the dark interior, a man drowning in fame he could no longer control. Twin Palms became a legend not because of what it was, but because of who he was when he lived there. As Sinatra rebuilt his career, rising from near ruin to win an Academy Award, reclaim chart success, and reinvent himself as one of the most powerful entertainers of the 20th century, Twin Palms remained frozen in time, a snapshot of the moment before the rise, a house forever linked to the version of Sinatra that struggled, faltered, and broke. Eventually, preservationists stepped in. The estate was restored with devotion, its original furniture styles recreated, its mid-century details polished until they glowed. Tours were offered. Guests walked through the rooms where Sinatra once played records at midnight, stood beside the piano-shaped pool where he brooded alone, and stepped onto the patio where arguments with Ava Gardner once echoed into the warm desert air. Some said they could feel something in the atmosphere. Not ghosts, but an emotional imprint. A sense that the house had absorbed a story too powerful to fade. Today, Twin Palms stands as both a masterpiece of architecture and a monument to heartbreak. It is the house where a legend fell apart before he rose again. The house where love burned too fiercely. The house where the world's most famous voice almost went silent. And its legacy endures because it reminds us that even icons, even voices as big as Sinatra's, have moments when the walls close in, the desert grows cold, and the only thing left is the long, painful path back to themselves.